market and small businesses are sitting ducks. And it's just a reality of spending a lot for very little and assuming compromise. Is that fair?
It's a lot there. So yeah, and I agree. And like, I think that getting things done via pushing consumers is a great thing to do, but isn't actually our biggest focus. That's one of the reasons we try and do these protections behind the scenes, and we try and make things secure by default. No, I think. Don't get me wrong. I am not making the case that like everything is great and that like that we aren't in a real sort of like world of hurt at present. What I'm saying is that I don't think it is. I don't think it is help. It is not help. I don't think we're helpless. I think we're able to do something about it, and I think doing things actually matters. And I think that it's actually, in some ways, it's actually good because the actual average state of a lot of places is actually, pretty damn bad. Like I've actually had a lot of my like peers. I've actually had like friends and peers become the CISOs of companies. So what they turn up and they work out like, you know what? There's actually a lot of basics we can do and actually increase security a lot. So I think we should
Right.
like. So there's two ways of looking. You can be a pessimist and say everything's terrible because like we haven't sorted this out and we've got all these vendors selling solutions that don't work. But on the flip side, you can say like, wow, can actually increase security a lot if we do some basic stuff and get at it, do protections and work at this. So if you ask me how I'm motivated,
Right.
that's how I see it. Is I do feel we can do something about it. We can't win totally, but it's not pointless either.
What are you most proud of in terms of delivery out of tag? Is there a specific thing that you hold up and say, you know what, this is my biggest, or this has been our biggest contribution to securing the ecosystem? And then I'll ask you, what are you least proud of? Like, what do you expect? Did you expect to deliver by now that you still think, wow, we're still struggling to get this right?
Yeah, I think the questions are related. I think I think some of the biggest things I'm most proud of, like I'm proud of the team. I'm proud of what we've built. I'm proud that like we are able to fix and block things. am proud that like protections we're rolling out around elections and detecting, and that we are part of the conversation and we are pushing forward security. Like so, I am proud on a day to day basis we're doing that. I suppose the part I'm sort of disappointed about. I'm sort of disappointed in general, not just us, but about the industry in general, about ties to this last conversation a little bit about how we're almost becoming blasé about it. That we're always becoming about it's turning into something that we just talk about a lot at conferences and on blog posts. And it's just becoming a topic of endless discussion versus how do we actually push past this? Like when we started out, we're sort of hoping that when we shined a light on things with Aurora and elsewhere, that this would actually have some big effect on the ecosystem and actually cause a lot of pain for the adversaries. What we're seeing now is that the same actors that are getting blogged about and talked about at conferences are still operating with relative impunity year over year. So that sort of shows we're not going to solve this solely through like blog posts and conference talks.
Speaking of actors operating with impunity, 2021 was in my mind a banner year for zero-day discoveries, because I think they've always been this number of 0 days happening. We just as an industry suddenly discovered 82 in the wild 0 days in 2021. If you count Axelion and all the other things, I know Project Zero tracks some other like the bigger ones in some other places. Are we better at finding them, or is the volume just increasing, or is that expansion of adversaries across the globe adding to this? Where do you think why so much sudden surge in 0 day activity?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. I think it's both actually. So I think there's more people hunting for them and there's more people producing them. So I do think there's some.
It's big business too. This threat intelligence business is big business. The business of creating reports and selling feeds and so on. So I mean, there's a big financial incentive to put more eyeballs at it, right?
There is, and there's also, but I don't think it's only about that too, right? And I don't think that's the biggest drive from many people doing it. It's also one of the more interesting parts, to be honest. Like actually hunting 0 day is actually a lot more interesting than hunting phishing. I'm sorry to say. So that's one of the reasons we find it's also more interesting to talk about. I think Maddie Stone, like my colleagues from Project Zero, have spoken on this a fair bit. But like, there's also other sides of like part of it is also that exploits are getting harder and actually getting patched too, right? So like often, like many years ago, you could run around with a 0 day and run around with it for years without it getting fixed, and then it wasn't found. These days, you actually, they only have a certain life. So that actually causes people to have to find more of them, and they actually get burnt and discovered. So that causes some churn. you also need a chain of exploits too, right? So to actually do a browser exploitation at the moment, it actually is often a sequence of exploits to escape from the renderer process to like then escape the sandbox and then maybe another stage. So there's more exploits to that, and it's also just changes in the ecosystem, right? So that like you went from, and it's also like look, early when I started, like it was often Word, PDF, and Flash exploits, and none of those were particularly hard, and they were fairly universally applicable. Now you're having to have very complex browser chains. I used to be an exploit guy, but when I look at modern exploits, they like blow my mind about like what people have to do these days. So I think it's a
Yeah.
combination of all those things, but also I think the market has to be growing, right? There are people that are buying exploits, buying capabilities from vendors, and that market is actually creating the demand from great researchers, unfortunately, going into the market of finding 0 days to give to repressive regimes so they can do their thing. And that's how the market is kind of being rewarding at present. And I think we can change that, I hope.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you bring up exploitation. I used to go to Pontoon in the early days when Dino would use or Charlie would use a single Safari exploit to take over a MacBook. Today, you go to Pontoon, it's 5 exploits chained together with 5 vulnerabilities jumping out the sandbox here and there. Here's the reality, though. Every machine falls, right? It still happens. That's where the nuance of the conversation gets. You get into this, are you a pessimist or an optimist? Because at the end of the day, the outcomes are the same. Guys are still winning pawn to one at alarming rates. You go to Tianfu Cup in China, like the level of exploitation there is through the roof, but the outcomes are still the same. So have we gotten any better?
Not nearly better enough. So like, as one of the things when I spoke at Offensive Con, like as the sort of like enemy in the gates of being the sort of like the one defensive guy and talking at Offensive Con, I encourage people, like I totally believe we need to be investing more into fundamentally making software more secure. And I think there are some efforts there of like Fuchsia, there's people looking at like Rust, but like, yeah, we just got to stop doing the same thing over and over again. And I think this needs to be a much bigger global push, because I agree that like we are seeing, many of the same sort of issues of type confusion and various like, memory corruption.
It's the same memory corruption issues over and over again, including at your own shop. I mean, you look at the Chrome patch, you look at the batch of Chrome patches every week. It's like 90% of it is memory corruption issues that are just continuing to haunt code bases, right?
Yeah, I think it's across the board, right? So we have to. I think we have to work out a way to build more secure software at some point, and we have to work out how to incentivize those trade offs. Because yeah, that's the challenge. But again, like I don't be totally pessimistic, and there's also because there are also other things coming too, right? I think some of the protections built into silicon. I think some of the efforts of like making it harder to deploy as well. That's actually one of the things we want to do with this finding of exploits. Is we want to make it that you have to be very careful when you're using your 0 days, because if you're not careful, then somebody like Tag, Project Zero, or many other teams are going to find and get your exploits patched very quickly. And I think making it so attackers have to be a lot more careful will slow them down and less people be compromised. So it's all a matter of like not extremes, but about trying to make people as secure as possible and to minimize the sort of like exposure here to these threats.
And impose cost on adversary. I mean, that's the biggest part of it is imposing cost, burning their 0 days, killing their bugs, that kind of thing, imposing additional costs. Because you're never going to get rid of them. They're too resourceful and their missions are too important, especially at the nation state level. I want to ask about sharing of IOCs. Because I know this is it's a hot button topic on Twitter, and Tag gets brought up in this a lot. Talk a little bit about like what's your policy around IOC sharing and when IOCs get released, when samples get released. Because I have examples of places where, you told me as a let's say I'm a Google user or someone in the industry, hey, there's a guy walking through your neighborhood. He's got a fancy key that could pop every door in your neighborhood. Good luck. Like that's how I feel when you don't tell me who the guy is, what is he looking to steal? Am I a potential target? Help me understand your own philosophy.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here, right? One is that like you see we've been becoming more forward leaning on this as well, but like I have a core principle on this, right? So like My goal is to work out what actually protects people the most. Not what is going to make the Twitter pundits happy, not what is going to make the threat intel industry people happy, but what actually protects people. And this is a constant trade-off, right? Like, we actually are a real intelligence team. So we have to balance, okay, like, we could produce a whole bunch more details now of exactly how we found this, but then it's going to make it a lot harder to find the next one. We also have the issue when, like, an exploit is brand new, that we know if we do too many details too early, then suddenly, we've seen this as, like, other threat actors are going to immediately be trying to, like, reproduce or take or get a copy of this exploit and then start throwing it around. So we always do.